Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Now, if you were present Friday, you remember that we began our discussion about the Jesuits' operations in Paraguay. The Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. Villages that were created by the Jesuits, holding captive the Guarani Indians, natives of that country, and literally creating a society that was formed from the ground up by the Jesuit order, without interference from Spain or Portugal or the Dominicans or the Franciscans or any of the monastic orders, and not even by the Pope itself. What we have before us is an example of history whereby it is examined, whereby it may be examined what kind of a society the Jesuits would create in the world if they had unfettered ability to do so. And as I read, I want my listeners to be aware that this is the first time in history that we know of that the Jesuits had full sway to create a society, and what kind of government it was, how it related to the people, what were the responsibilities of the people to the government established by the Jesuits in these reductions, and how the Jesuits operated. And also, with this in the back of your mind, that although the Jesuits were reviled all throughout Europe, that they've never been opposed seriously. They've never been seriously opposed in this country. Now, if there's a country upon the earth whereby the Jesuits might have another opportunity to create a Jesuit utopia, like was described the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay, the United States is it. So pay particular attention to how these Jesuit reductions were operated in Paraguay, and see if you can find any similarities between that form of government and the form of government we have here in the United States of America. Now, I'm going to back up as customary. Back up to the beginning of the paragraph that we ended with Friday for continuity purposes, and to kind of gather ourselves back up, having undergone the weekend break. I'm going to begin the first full paragraph on page 171 if you're following along in your own copy of the book. The author, R.W. Thompson, and by the way, the title of the book is The Footprints of the Jesuits. The author is R.W. Thompson, Secretary of the American Navy, very, very qualified in assessing threats to our constitutional republic, both foreign and domestic, and his favorite subject was the Jesuit order. He says, the Jesuit idea of exclusiveness and superiority influenced the conduct of their missions in Paraguay as elsewhere. But for this, different results might have ensued. If they had been content to recognize the monastic orders, we're talking about the Franciscans and the other monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church operating in South and Central America, it says, if they had been content to recognize the monastic orders as equally important and meritorious as their own in the field of missionary labor, and the ancient machinery of the Church as retaining its capacity for effectiveness in spreading Christianity throughout the world, if, in other words, they had been content to recognize any merit as existing elsewhere than among themselves, the natives, that is, the natives of Paraguay, may have been subject to a very different destiny than that which in the end overwhelmed them. But they were not permitted, by the nature and character of their order, to entertain any such feelings, or to cherish any ideas of success other than those which promised to inure to their own advancement. So, again, reiterating, the Jesuits despised the other monastic orders, considered them corrupt and not worthy of service to the church, and the Jesuits had a likewise opinion of the papacy, morally bankrupt, a bad example, and which literally, in aggregate, precipitated the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Jesuits are going to set their own example, and they have a superior attitude and opinion of themselves. And they want these Jesuit reductions not to be interfered with by the Church, by the Pope, by the Dominicans or the Franciscans, or anybody else. This is the time for the Jesuits to shine. Okay? Now, it says, accordingly, we find them, as explained by one of their modern defenders of high celebrity, basing their claim to exclusive jurisdiction over the natives of Paraguay upon the express ground that the ecclesiastical influences sent out under the auspices of the Church and the patronage of the Spanish and Portuguese kings had become injurious rather than beneficial to the natives in consequence of the most flagrant corruption. So here we have the Jesuits saying all this European influence, whether it be the monastic orders, the papacy, or the kings, even the kings of Spain and Portugal, were corrupt. Now it says, in explanation of the course pursued by the Jesuit missionaries, he says, quote, one of the first experiences of the missions was that it was in vain to hope for any permanent fruit among the Indians unless they were separated from the evil influences of the Europeans who swarmed into the New World, carrying with them all the vices of the old, and adding to them the licentiousness and cruelty which the freedom of a new country and the hopes of speedy riches brought with them, unquote. Now, this is where we left off Friday in the book, and it says, this same author also speaks of, quote, the hordes of adventurers who flocked over to the New World, the scum of the great cities of Europe, in order to show that by intercourse with them the natives knew, quote, little more of the Christian name than the vices of those who professed it, unquote. So everywhere they went, these the example of the Europeans were evil and corrupt, and they were no example to be followed by this so-called pristine, even though it was backwards, and these natives, and never corrupted or never been under the influence of Europeans. The Jesuits denounced all Europeans as corrupt. Now he says, to let it be known that lay adventurers are not alone referred to here, he mentions expressly the worldly ambitious ecclesiastics, that is, officials of the church, priests, right? He says, the worldly ambitious ecclesiastics and religious, unquote, who were, quote, forgetful of the spirit of their calling, or apostates from their rule, unquote. He casts a variety of aspersions upon the characters of the bishops of Assumption and Buenos Aires, and maintains the proposition with earnestness that if the Indians were allowed to have unrestrained intercourse with the Spaniards, quote, they would derive the worst consequences from their bad example, which is entirely opposed to the principle of morality, unquote. In this, the Jesuits display their wonderful astuteness, and it may be supposed that they employed these and other kindred allegations with effect in Spain, inasmuch as they succeeded in obtaining from the king a special, quote, prohibition for Europeans to set foot in Paraguay, so that they could thereby secure exclusive control of the natives, and bring them under Jesuit influences alone, independent of the monastic orders and the ecclesiastical authorities, that is, church authorities of the ecclesiastical authorities of the church. This was a great stroke of policy upon their part, because by ignoring the church, its ecclesiastics, and the monastic orders, they were enabled to assume prerogatives of the most extravagant character and to hold themselves out to the natives as the only Europeans worthy of obedience and the only true representatives of Christian civilization. That's right. The Jesuits think that they are the only ones in the whole world that can offer a true representation of a Christian civilization. That belief is still held by the Jesuits today. Now it says, and by the way, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not the United States is a Christian nation. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Now it says, not only therefore in the manner of securing the royal approval of their exclusive pretensions, but in the character of the government established by them, did they exhibit their chief characteristics of ambition, vanity, and superciliousness. Characteristics they have never lost. Okay, with all this autonomy that they enjoyed in Paraguay, it only increased their feeling of ambition and vanity and superciliousness. Now it says the government established by them in Paraguay, the government established by the Jesuits in Paraguay, was essentially monarchical. Remember this, a monarchy is what they established. When they had a free hand, without interference from the church or the Pope or the monastic orders or the King of Spain or the King of Portugal or any other influence whatsoever, the Jesuits chose a monarchical form of government. In other words, rule by one. That's what monarchy means. Monarchy, rule by one. A monolith, as it were. Now, it could not have been otherwise under the principles of their Constitution. Under the false name of a Christian republic, the false name of a Christian, they called it a Christian republic, didn't they? But it's a monarchy. How can it be a Christian republic? You see, they called it a Christian republic, and people may have believed that it was a Christian republic, but it was a monarchy, a Jesuit monarchy. And who's the monarch, the monolith that ruled over the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay? The Jesuit general. Okay? He ran the Jesuit reductions from Italy, from his home base, and he ruled through the provincials, the Jesuit provincials that were in place in Paraguay. And, of course, the Jesuit priests that ran the government of Paraguay, of these Jesuit reductions. Now, listen, it says, under the false name of a Christian republic. In other words, it had the name of a Christian republic, but it wasn't a Christian republic. It was a monarchy. It says it was, to all intents and purposes, a theocratic state. Now, that's government by God. A theocracy is a government by God. But what God is governing? It says, for it was to all intents and purposes a theocratic state, so constructed as to free it from all European influences, except such as emanated from their superior in Rome. There's the God that was worshipped in Paraguay, the Jesuit general. And did he not teach all of his Jesuits by constitution and oath that he is the sole voice of God on the earth? Now it says, all the intercourse they had with the church and the Pope was through him, through the Jesuit general, and whatsoever commands he gave were uninquiringly obeyed by them, without stopping to investigate or concerning themselves in the least to know whether the Church or the Pope approved or disapproved of them. In other words, the Jesuit general stands way out in front or above both the Church and the Pope. And he ruled supremely in these Jesuit reductions. And whatever the Pope and the Church thought of their business did not even enter their minds. Now, clearly you can see they are an opponent of the Church in this respect. At least in this respect. They do not respect the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church. They are an entity unto themselves, and they seek to rule without interference from anyone else. And it says, in order to impress the natives with the idea of their independence and of their superiority over the monastic orders and the church ecclesiastics, they practice the most artful means to persuade them to hold no intercourse, that is, no interaction at all, with either the Spaniards or the Portuguese, upon the grounds that they could not do so without encountering the example of their vices and immoralities. Don't go around these Spaniards or Portuguese or the monastic orders or any of the representatives of the church, because they'll soil you with their vices and immoralities. Okay? Now, I'm not questioning the immoralities and the vices of the Spaniards or the Portuguese or the church ecclesiastics or the popes or anybody else. They were truly corrupt, just like they are today. I mean, a leopard can't change his spots, but the Jesuits are impressing upon these people that they are, as it were, God's representatives on earth, and God's only representatives on earth. The Jesuits, who were running these missions, these Jesuit missions, these Jesuit reductions. The society created from the ground up by the Jesuits, without interference from anybody. Now it says, the unsuspecting Indians were easily seduced by acts of kindness. Okay? The Indians, the unsuspecting Indians, think now of the unsuspecting American people who've never heard a word, either from the churches or from the schools or from the mainstream media or the alternative media, and even most of the alternative to the alternative media. They've never heard a word, one way or the other, about the Jesuits. Totally unsuspecting. That's the American people. Now, these Indians, the unsuspecting Indians, were easily deceived by acts of kindness. You might think of this as Social Security or any of the other benefits that our Jesuit reduction here in the United States has provided us. We're easily bought and sold by these wonderful acts of kindness by our benevolent, quote-unquote, Christian government, right? He says the unsuspecting Indians were easily seduced by acts of kindness, and the result was that in the course of a brief period, they succeeded in establishing a number of what are called reductions, or more properly speaking, villages, with multitudes of Indians, multitudes of Americans assembled under them, the whole aggregating in the end several 100,000. So here we have this isolated area in Paraguay, untouched by the Europeans, untouched by the ecclesiastics of the church, created by the Jesuit order, started from the ground up, and it finally came to control hundreds of thousands of people. Now, these constituted the Jesuit state. Okay? This is the New World Order. If what R.W. Thompson is telling us, both in this book and his other book, The Papacy and the Civil Power, if what we've been studying over these last 5 or 6 years on Inquisition Update are any indication, we know this Jesuit state in Paraguay is at least a shadow of what the Jesuits would create, not only in this country, but every country around the world. In other words, a global government, a global Jesuit reduction. And it says these constituted the Jesuit state, these Paraguayan reductions, these Guarani Indians and their little villages operated by the Jesuits. It says these constituted the Jesuit state and were all by the mere ceremony of baptism brought under Jesuit dominion. So baptism was your membership card. If you were baptized by a Jesuit, then you were a member of their kingdom. Right? An earthly kingdom. Now it says, at each reduction, I wonder if the Jesuits have a record of my baptism. It says, at each reduction, the natives were allowed to select a secular magistracy, in other words, a representative in the government, a representative in the Jesuit government of Paraguay. Yes, the natives were allowed, the natives of Paraguay, America in miniature, they were allowed a secular magistracy with limited and unimportant powers over such temporal affairs as could be entrusted to them without impairing the theocratic feature of the government. In other words, we're going to give you people, you wonderful Guarani Indians, a representative in the government. Call the House of Representatives, call it whatever you want, but it's going to have unimportant. It's just for window dressing. This is a theocracy. It's a monarchy. You can call it a Christian society if you like, but it is a monarchy, a theocracy controlled by the Jesuit general. You don't have a vote, you have a pretense. Okay? Now it says, but in order to provide against the possibility of permitting even these few temporal affairs from being conducted independently of the Jesuits, that is, they adopted the precaution of providing that before any important decisions were carried into effect, they should obtain their sanction, the Jesuits' sanction, as their spiritual shepherds. Spiritual shepherds. That's what these Jesuits were down in Paraguay. Jesuit. Spiritual shepherds. They worshiped the God in Rome, the Jesuit general. And it says there never was anywhere a more thorough and complete blending of church and state together. Never in the history of the world, including the old world order, never was there ever a better example of the blending and uniting of church and state as there was in these Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. The church, that is the Jesuits, and their God in Rome, the Jesuit general, had complete control of the church and the state. We'll continue right after this.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
In this day of economic uncertainty and soaring unemployment, safe investments are often hard to find, but investing in the precious metals is the safest investment of all, because gold and silver is real money. Government-printed currency is not. Call Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company at 1-800-375-4188. Melody has been helping people secure their financial future for over 10 years. While others in the business claim honesty, Melody will deliver. Give her a call, 1-800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get Left Behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you appreciate Inquisition Update and would like to see it continue, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Now, look, before we even continue, the whole purpose of this book, Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, Secretary of the American Navy, trained to assess the most lethal threats to our constitutional republic, both from foreign and domestic foes. That is the purpose of R.W. Thompson. And this book, Footprints of the Jesuits, shows us the history of that which R.W. Thompson said was the only threat to this republic, either foreign or domestic, which in fact is both foreign and domestic, that could overthrow this constitutional republic. And he shows their history, their machinations, both starting from the very Constitution of Ignatius Loyola founding the Jesuit order, completely bypassing the papacy, or merely paying him lip service. We'll go any place in the world you want us to go at our expense. And to their machinations in France, Spain, Portugal, England, Germany, India, Japan, and culminating now with an example for the first time in history of the Jesuits starting from the ground floor and building a society. And all of this is given by R.W. Thompson to show us what the Jesuits would do, what they have done, and what they will continue to do until they finally create their global monotheistic monarchy. Global rule by one man, the monolith a ruthless monolith. He says, but in order to provide against the possibility of permitting even these few temporal affairs from being conducted independently of the Jesuits, they adopted the precaution of providing that before any important decisions were carried into effect, they should obtain their sanction as spiritual shepherds. Does that give you any indication of how your government operates today? Before any important decisions are carried into effect, they must first meet the sanction of the Jesuit spiritual fathers of this country, of Georgetown, Fordham, Boston College, all the 28 Jesuit universities. There's your shadow government. Just as it was, well, it wasn't a shadow government in Paraguay, it was the government. But the object for the world is to reduce the world, that they've already reduced the United States to a Jesuit reduction, but to reduce the whole world to a Jesuit reduction. And by the way, now it's appropriate time to remind my listeners that for the first time in world history, we now have a Jesuit priest as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. He's both the white pope and the black pope. You talk about consolidation of power, that's what, if the Jesuits ever had power in Washington, D.C., prior to the current Pope, Francis I, certainly the Jesuits have power in Washington, D.C. today. Because what we have is a union of church and state in that one Pope. A more perfect union of church and state than there has ever existed in the world in the Roman Catholic Church. And it's going to inspire our government to do likewise, to unite church and state. R.W. Thompson says there never was anywhere more thorough and complete blending of church and state together as there was in Paraguay, as there is in the United States of America, and soon the entire world. Now, he says, although this new state, this Jesuit state, was established under the pretense that it was necessary to protect the natives against the bad influences of the Spaniards and the Portuguese, the approval of it by the King of Spain, Philip III, was obtained by the promise that, quote, every adult must pay him the tribute of $1, unquote, a consideration of chief importance with him. In other words, taxation, revenue. Now, Philip IV was equally disposed to favor the Jesuits, presumably for want of proper information, for it would have required but little investigation at that time to have discovered that the only motive of the Jesuits for securing royal approbation in Europe was that they might ultimately acquire power to plot against European royalty itself when it should stand in the way of their ambition. And certainly we've seen from the examples that R.W. Thompson has already given us that they did oppose, when it benefited the Jesuits, they opposed the monarchy. Those who ruled under the power and prestige and authority of the papacy. Okay? They resisted both the papacy and the monarchs. The Jesuits set themselves apart as answerable to no one. Remember the example that R.W. Thompson gives us in France, where the Jesuits erected an institution when the civil and ecclesiastical authorities forbid it. They just walked right in to this territory where no churches were to be built, and they built themselves a monastery. And they were opposed by the government, the people, and the church. All opposition against the Jesuits. And they still built their church. They answered to nobody but the Jesuit general. And he continues now, he says, to show how little obedience was paid to the public authorities of either Spain or Portugal, It's only necessary to observe that each reduction was governed by a Jesuit father, supported by a vicar and a curate as assistants, but whose chief duty was espionage. Now, I'll just tell you, in the United States, this country is enveloped and divided into 10 Jesuit provinces. Over each of these provinces rules a Jesuit provincial. He's the government of that province. Nothing happens within that province that he does not know about. The Jesuit provincial guides and directs his army of Jesuit coadjutors, Jesuit priests, bishops in the church, others assigned to report to this Jesuit provincial, and they keep an eye on the province. They are engaged in espionage, and they keep the Jesuit provincial informed of everything that transpires in the province. And then he reports directly to the Jesuit general in Rome. Kind of sounds like a shadow government, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what it is. Now, it says this governing father was under the orders of a superior, who presided over a diocese of 5 or 6 parishes, the supervision and management of the whole being lodged in the hands of a provincial who, quote, received his orders direct from the general in Rome, unquote. If, therefore, the kings of Spain and Portugal supposed that the Jesuits in Portugal intended to pay fidelity to them, or to either of them, they were deceived, as in the course of events they discovered. They obeyed their general in Rome, and he alone. So, stop and think. We have these same Jesuits, these same Jesuit provincials, the same Jesuit general that was in control in Portugal, through the Jesuit provinces. You might regard all these Guarani, all of these Jesuit reductions in Paraguay as the Jesuits' turf, as one of the Jesuit provinces. The Jesuit general in Rome governed them all. We have the same Jesuit general, the same Jesuit provincials, the same Jesuit priests and fathers in the government controlling everything. Now look, if the example of Paraguay is any example at all, if we are opposed to the Jesuit order, we would certainly demand the dissolution of these Jesuit provinces, wouldn't we? And the expulsion of these Jesuit provincials who answer not to the people of the United States, who have no loyalty whatsoever to the people of the United States. Their loyalty is to the Jesuit general, the monarch, the theocrat in Rome. He doesn't even live in this country. You would think that if good sense prevailed, whether you thought the Jesuits were good or bad, you'd have to at least come to the conclusion that they answer to a foreign potentate. And at least take a closer look. What is a Jesuit? What have the Jesuits done throughout their history? What do they propound? Do they propound a kingdom of Christ or a kingdom of their own? And if so, where do they get their spiritual authority and governing authority? Do they get it from the people, or do they get it from someone else? The obvious questions lead to obvious answers. And this is why R.W. Thompson is trying to educate us in this book. He says the praise ought not to be withheld from the Jesuits that the natives who were thus brought under their influence were better and more kindly treated than those who were compelled to submit to the dominion of the Spaniards and Portuguese beyond the limits of Paraguay. All right? So the author kindly admits that the subjects, the Guarani Indians of these Jesuit reductions, were better treated than anyone else under any of the other monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church, or by the Spaniards, or by the Portuguese. In other words, they were very happy slaves. Didn't even realize they were enslaved. I mean, when they looked at their own lives and the wealth and affluence and their participation in the government, they were far better off than the tyranny, the brutal tyranny imposed upon the rest of the natives of South America by the Dominicans and the Franciscans and by the popes and by the King of France and the kings of Portugal. They were far better off in the Jesuit reductions. Happy slaves. And it says they partook of their labors, of their amusements, that is, the Jesuits, partook of their labors and their amusements, of their joys, of their sorrows. They visited daily every house in which lay a sick person, whom they served as the kindest nurse. Kind of sounds like health care, doesn't it, in this country? That was how government-sponsored, people come to take care of you. Government taking care of you. It says they visited daily every house in which lay a sick person, whom they served as the kindest nurse, and to whom they seemed to be ministering genii, unquote. Now, these are words of a historian. All right, a historian friendly, obviously, to the Jesuits, but this is how they ran their reduction. And it says, by these and other kindnesses, you might consider kindness as just a synonym for benefits. It says, by these and other kindnesses, they brought the Indians to look upon them with a feeling of bordering on idolatry. Well, you might say, well, Tom, the people of the United States know nothing about the Jesuit order. How could they view the Jesuits as idols? How could they idolize the Jesuits when their entire history's been hidden from the common people? You walk down the street and you ask 1,000 people, what do you know about the Jesuits? Most of them will turn and look at you like you got three heads. What did you just say? Jesuits? Oh, well, I've heard of them, but I don't know anything about them. That's the best answer you'll get, by the way, from American citizens. So who idolizes these Jesuits in the United States? The Catholics in our government. Nancy Pelosi. And the whole lot of the rest. And they realized, as did the Guarani Indians in Paraguay, that if you oppose these Jesuits and the direction that they're setting for this country, all of a sudden you come into disrepute. As I used an example one morning, you may come home from the legislature one night, slip into bed with your wife late at night, and wake up in the morning in the same bed with a prostitute, with newspaper cameras all around the bed taking pictures of you in bed with this prostitute. And looking like, says, what in the world is going on here? That's just how easy they can destroy a politician's life in this country if they oppose the direction that these Jesuit fathers wish this country to go. It says, by these and other kindnesses, they brought the Indians to look upon them with a feeling bordering on idolatry. But whilst they were friends, they were also sovereigns. Okay? Unanswerable to anyone. It says they were also sovereigns and, quote, governed with absolute and unquestioned authority. Absolute and unquestioned authority. Sounds like a dictatorship, doesn't it? A ruthless monolith, right? That's what it is. Unquestioned authority. You respond to this government with absolute and unquestioned obedience. Now, there was a time in this country where the people had redress of grievances. Not anymore in the United States. And less and less all the time. You know, we used to have the presumption of innocence in this country. But now we have the presumption of guilt. And the government, now dressed in black, by the way, interesting coincidence possibly, but nonetheless, government officials now dressed in black come to your house, haul you out at 3 o'clock in the morning, take your computer and your belongings without a warrant, and can haul you off to the pokey and interrogate you under hot lights for as long as they please. And they don't answer questions. You answer questions. And only if they'll allow it will a legal representative, be given to you during this questioning. You know, we used to have Miranda rights. Well, Miranda hit the road. No more Miranda rights. It's becoming dictatorial, isn't it? The government no longer answers to the people. The people have no rights, so they're sovereigns now, aren't they? He says they were governed with absolute and unquestioned authority. He says this was a necessary and indispensable part of their system of government, the Jesuit system of government. Absolute and unquestioned authority by the government. And unquestioned and absolute response and obedience from the people. It says this was a necessary and an indispensable part of the system of their government, which embodied the Jesuit idea of a Christian republic. That's their idea of a Christian republic. They are the absolute sovereigns, and we are their absolute subjects. They have absolute and unquestioned authority, and we have absolute and unquestioning obedience to that authority. That's the Jesuit idea of a quote-unquote Christian republic. So America's got some changing yet to do. We've made a large leap toward this sovereignty and this unquestioning obedience and absolute authority of the government, but we've got a long way yet to go. And if it takes guns to do it, that's what the government will do. Wearing black, singing praises of their Jesuit monarch in Rome, but that's what they're going to do. They're going to make this a quote-unquote Christian republic. And guess what? They got the help of all the ecumenical evangelibellies that think they're going to build a Christian republic in this country. Post-Vatican Council, too. It says it was in everything pertaining to the management of public affairs an absolute monarchy, with all its powers centered in the Jesuit general at Rome, whose authority was accepted as equal to that of God, and to whose command obedience was exacted from all. If you're going to exact obedience from all, you must have a massive police force, either in massive numbers or massive coercive power, force, or both. And our government has both. Innumerable hordes serve the government. And they have the best technology available today to force you to do what they want you to do. That's exactly how they manage the affairs down in the Paraguayan reduction, the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. He says, apart from this governing authority, universal equality prevailed. Apart from this governing authority, universal equality prevailed. In other words, the people were all equal. Well, except for the governing authority, of course. In other words, there were two classes. The rich ruling elite, the Jesuits, and the people, who were all on an equality. Now, my Bible tells me that, speaking of the body of Christ, that Christ is the king and we are all brethren. In the Jesuit utopia, the Jesuit general is supreme, and everyone else except the Jesuits' priests are on an equality. It's kind of a mirror image of what God intended for a truly godly government. They just replaced the players. They replaced Christ with the Jesuit general. It says, apart from this governing authority, universal equality prevailed. The principles of socialism or communism, very much as now understood, governed all the reductions. Okay? Get an opportunity for the Jesuits to install a global government or even a national government like here in the United States, it will begin more and more and more to show the qualities of socialism or communism. So the target is capitalism, right? That which grew out of the Protestant Reformation. They're going to replace that with socialism and communism, and what they both have in common is the people have to rely upon the government for everything. They don't rely upon God for anything because the government is the God, and the God provides for his people. The Jesuit general provides for his people. And all praise, honor, and glory goes to not God, but the Jesuit general, or the government that he establishes. Kind of sounds like the United States, doesn't it? I mean, that's the reality that ought to be sinking into my listeners. R.W. Thompson is showing us these Jesuit reductions in Paraguay as an example to show us what the Jesuits would create in the whole world if they had a free hand to do it, or the cooperation of all the kings of the earth to do it. This is what they would establish in the United States if they had the cooperation of our government. Now, does it make a little more sense to you why I say that we shouldn't have any Catholics in our government? Hate to
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.